السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Welcome everyone. My name is Naveed Hussein. I am joined today by our beloved Sheikh Joe Bradford, and we are also expecting our brother Uthman Mughni, our therapist who's been joining us on our monthly lives. Alhamdulillah, we've had a great series so far. I think this is our fourth or fifth live. We've talked about many different topics related to marriage, and today is a very good one. We're going to be talking about what to seek in a wife. And inshallah, you're going to be hearing from different perspectives, legal, personal, from a therapeutic perspective, and also just based off of experience. And as men here, I think that we're going to have a unique insight or an appropriate insight into what to seek in a wife. So inshallah, with that, Sheikh Joe, any starting thoughts in terms of, how to frame our discussion on how to seek a wife?
So I wanted to actually start by reading something. Um, I think it's important since this is a lecture that's directed towards men. Uh, it's very important to understand why the topic is important to you and why it needs to go beyond simply attraction to the physical. What is it that marriage um, does for the health, the wealth, the sanity, the faith of a man? So there was a French sociologist by the name of Emile Durkheim, and he wrote a book on suicide. It's called On Suicide, and he concludes that the answers to issues of suicide are not psychological, but they are more sociological. So it's less about the individual psychosis of the person and more about the conditioning and the environment that they find themselves in. So what were some of the conclusions that he came to? For example, he came to the conclusion that Protestants were more likely to kill themselves than Catholics because of the types of lives that they live. Those with more education were more likely to kill themselves than those with less, because of the types of lives. The unmarried were more likely to kill themselves than married people were. So the social patterns had some play in what was going on. So obviously, I'm sure we'll got the classic, but correlation is not causation. We understand that. But looking holistically at what he mentions, he says, the social patterns are conclusive that the quality and character of the social ties that people have a significant impact on their lives. How much do we flourish? How much do we flounder based upon the social characteristics? And particularly, he mentions here that there are two patterns that play into this. First is what he termed integration. And he said that men and women that were not sufficiently integrated into the social fabric of their lives or a society, they were not regular recipients of care and concern, then they were more likely to submit to egotistical suicide. Because they thought it was the only way to express their profound loneliness or lack of connection to others. And then secondly is the norms and values that play out in their daily lives. So our norms and our values give direction to our lives, and they give meaning to our lives, and they kind of set the order for what goes on in our life. So men and women who lack clear social norms, clear values, are more likely to succumb to anomic suicide, meaning that Their life lacks a routine and a rhythm, and so they just kind of give up because they don't have a direction or a purpose,
mm,
right? So why am I mentioning this? I'm mentioning this because the idea is it is he says here, he says, "Man cannot live unless he attaches himself to an object that is greater than himself and outlives him."
right,
So life, they say, is only tolerable if one can see some purpose in it and it has a goal and one that is worth pursuing. So, in his estimate, marriage and family were one of those goals, right? Just to be married, to be cared for, and to care for someone else was, one of those goals. Our family binds us together, or we bind together and create family. Family binds us to society. Society, creates, a civilization. And so, it's it pro these things protect us from feeling lonely in the world, and they also protect us from a type of egotism that comes up from, only, relying on ourselves and, only, um, only engaging in self-fulfillment. So I prefaced that, or I wanted to bring that up because I found it to be very insightful
mm,
that if if we need a goal and a purpose in life, right? Where do we start with that as Muslims?
سبحان
وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I did not create man and jinn except to worship me. So on an individual level, our goal and our purpose and our intent is to worship Allah. Okay, how do we worship Allah through our mundane, non-religious, non-worship, non-devotional actions? By making sure that our social routines and our customs are in accordance with the uswa hasana, the good example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. لقد كان لكم في رسول الله أسوة حسنة لمن كان يرجو الله واليوم الآخر وذكر الله كثيرا. You have in the Messenger of Allah a good example for whoever wishes to meet Allah, going back to the first purpose, and the day of judgment, and remembers Allah much. So if you want to meet the messenger you want to meet Allah, you want to be safe on the day of judgment, and you want to remember Allah much, you want to realize the worship of Allah, then you need to be following the sunnah. And then when we look at the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, because this is where we get into kind of the egotism of religious thought, or the egotism of spiritual bypass. Three young men, the hadith is in Bukhari, three young men, they look at the example of the Prophet ﷺ. They say, I'm going to fast every day. I'm never going to break my fast. I'm going to pray all night. I'm never going to sleep. And the other one says, I'm never going to marry women. The Prophet ﷺ hears of this. He calls them to him. He says, Inni asumu wa aftir. I fast and I break my fast. Usalli wa anam. I pray and I sleep. Wa atazawwaju nisa. And I marry women. فَمَنْ رَغِبَ عَنْ سُنَّتِي فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي. So whoever seeks other than my sunnah is not from me.
الله
Now that we get to that point, and we have to say salam to our brother Osman at first, because
No, I don't. Well, I didn't want to. You're on a flow. I didn't want to mess you up.
I got to the break so I could get I appreciate that though. So now we say, okay, I'm worshiping Allah. I'm following the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet's sunnah is to marry. Where do I go from there? Right? What are the other objectives? Well, the other objectives is that I would want the Prophet ﷺ to be happy with me. I would want to be one of those people that on the day of judgment, when I am resurrected, I'm resurrected in his zumrah, in his group, and that I can go to him at the Kawthar and drink from the Kawthar, whose cups are as numerous as the stars and whose water is as white as milk and as sweet as honey. And those who did not follow his sunnah, who innovated, will be pulled away from. I don't want to be pulled away from that. I want to be the pride of the Prophet ﷺ. Like the poet, he said, وَمِمَّا زَادَنِي فَخْرًا وَتِيهًا وَكِدْتُ بِأَخْمُصِ أَطَأُ الثُّرَيَّا دخولي تحت قولك يا عبادي وأن أرسلت أحمد لي نبيا. That he says, and from what has increased me in joy and ecstaticism, and I almost stepped on the stars with the bottom of my feet, is that you put me under your statement, O my servants, and you sent Ahmed to me as a prophet. So I want to be that person who is ecstatic in meeting the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ is proud and ecstatic to meet him. And that brings us to a very important hadith that when I was doing some preliminary reading for our discussion today, I found that every single scholar and every single madhab mentions this. The Prophet ﷺ said, and hadith is in the Sahihain, or is in the Sitta, he says, تَزَوَّجُوا الْوَلُودَ الْوَدُودَ فَإِنِّي مُكَاثِرٌ بِكُمَ الْأُمَمَ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. Marry a loving, fertile woman, for I will boast of your numbers on the Day of Judgment. So this ties the idea of a few different things, of marriage, of procreation, of affection, to the idea of the sunnah and to the idea of the ummah. And so I'll leave it there.
I think that's such a good framing, right? Because we're talking about what to seek in a wife, but before we get to that, we have to say why seek a wife, right? And I think that's a really big question these days, that a lot of guys are thinking, okay, why should I even get married? And I think, alhamdulillah, kind of looking at it from that paradigm of the sunnah, of fulfillment, of procreation and family and supporting a community, I think that, kind of hits the question as to why should I seek a wife. Usman, any thoughts kind of on that question about why seeking a wife? Mashallah, Sheikh Joe kind of put in perspective from, the Sunnah perspective, but any other reasons why we should even seek a wife before we
Barakallah feek. No, I've heard a lot of different perspectives about this, right? Nikah min sunan al-mursalin, that like nikah is from the sunnah of the prophets, right? But I really like how you framed one point is, and like I want to make the Prophet ﷺ happy. I do it because he will be proud and he will be happy, inshallah, when we meet him. And I think that's a beautiful lens, frame of mind to start off with, because then every step of the way you're going to be thinking, inshallah, about, okay, is this pleasing to Allah and His Rasul? Is this pleasing? And also, and please correct me if I'm a sheikh, that in and of itself, that whole process becomes an ibadah then, right?
Yeah.
To a certain extent, yeah.
You think about it, that's النبي أولى بالمؤمنين من أنفسهم وأزواجه أمهاتهم وفي قراءة أظنها شاذة وهو أبوهم. Right? So the Prophet has more right over the believers, right, than themselves, and his wives are their mothers. And in a anomalous recitation, it says, and he is their father, which sometimes some scholars of those anomalous recitations are just there as tafsir, right? So it's as if to say he has more right over you than yourself, and his wives are your mothers. That means he is like your father, right? So, would we want to make our father proud? Yeah. So we would want to make the Prophet ﷺ proud as well. And I think when we frame our discussions of our identity through the prophetic identity, it becomes more easily for us to not fall into the somewhat bad mannered frameworks of masculinity or of manliness that are out there. And then that brings up, for me, that brings up the the idea of like, okay, well, when the scholars are talking about looking for, say, okay, let's take this hadith, marry the fertile, loving woman. Okay, what's implied by that? There's a family history. There's emotional intelligence that's noticeable,
Mm.
right? That there is a connection, because you're not going to be connected to her directly. So there's going to be family connections that are going to inform you of those things. So it's really not simply about physical attraction, although physical attraction is important. The Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَانْكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ مَثْنَى وَثُلَاثَ وَرُبَاعَ فَإِن لَّمْ تَعْدِلُوا فَوَاحِدَةٌ أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. Marry women that are attracted to you, or marry women that you are attracted to, right? Marry women who are comely to you, who are attractive to you, right? 2 or 3 or 4, and if you cannot do justice, then 1, right? And so because of this, at least in the Hanbali madhab, right, and this is explicit from an Imam Ahmed, that he says the very first thing that a man does when he goes to ask about marriage is he asks about the beauty of the woman. Not because it's the only thing in marriage, but because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala began with it, and because if you don't like how she looks and you reject her, you haven't rejected her for a good quality. But if you come and you say, no, tell me, I don't care about any of that, tell me about her deen. And they say, inshallah, she stands all night in prayer, she's memorized all 10 qira'at, she'd probably, more qualified than you to lead prayer, and and she does this and she does that, and then you see her and you're like there's no attraction. And that's normal, right? I sometimes find in Islamic cultures that the idea of attraction from men to women and women to men is like, doesn't matter, just get married.
Right.
Marry
You're being.
whatever,
I
right?
don't know if you've heard. Sorry to interrupt, Sheikh, but because I hear this a lot, especially with well-intended young men who are more practicing. Am I being shallow if I am looking for beauty, right? Um, I mean, you wouldn't want to be on the other end of that, right? That somebody just marries you because you have good ada, but they're not physically attracted to you. There is an aspect of protecting against zina. Let's be real, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
mean,
Ibn Jawzi actually expressly mentions this, that if you are infatuated with a prospective spouse and you have the ability to marry them, then you should,
Mm.
because you're going to be more satisfied.
Right.
And if you can't, then you need to know your type, right? So if they're telling you, hey, marry the blonde girl, and you're like, I'm not attracted to blondes, I'm attracted to brunettes, or to women with black hair or auburn hair or whatever, you're not shallow for saying, I want to marry a woman that I'm attracted to so that I'm not looking anywhere else.
Mm.
And that's something that, that applies, universally. But here in this lecture, we're specifically talking about men. Men should not feel bad for wanting to be attracted to the woman that they marry, and for searching for that. Now, I think you guys have probably seen this, where sometimes, people go a little bit too much, like it's like it's just way overboard.
Right.
Of well, this type of hair and this type of body shape and this type of eyes and this type of teeth, and did she wear braces or not as a child? There's certain things like you can't control for, right?
Right.
You have to have a certain percentage. I think
Mm.
it's very important for people to not be like 100% or nothing. But if you can really get like 70 to 80% and the rest is tolerable, you've got it good, right?
Mm. I've seen more the former than the latter. Just out of curiosity, like I'm sure a lot of people come to you for advice as well. How often do you see the person who's looking for the absolute 10 out of 10 gorgeous spouse versus the ones who I feel, again, that like maybe society's telling me I'm being too shallow, and I don't know if I should only look for, or am I wrong in just looking for beauty?
I actually don't find I mean, I find men who have been told that they're being shallow and who are
Mm-mm.
wondering, am I really
Mm.
being shallow for wanting to be married to somebody that I find beautiful?
Right.
But I find that actually most men, their complaint is actually not finding a woman that meets their values.
That's
Mm.
what I've seen too.
Mm-mm.
I've kind of seen the same thing, that no, they're not necessarily looking for the dot, drop 10 necessarily, but like Sheikh Joe said, it's like the values don't align, or they care about their career too much, or it
Yeah.
seems like they care about their career too much, or it doesn't seem like they really want to be in motherly type. So that's kind of what I see too. It's more of the values and kind of the future vision of what a family looks like that most guys are not jiving with.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I think
I'm
I'm
sorry
sorry,
that
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Like and so I think that along with starting off with looking at what is your intention for getting married, and like what it's marriage is placed in Islam, what's your value system, right? Because I tell people to look for compatibility. That's this idea that opposites attract. I don't know where it came from. There's no scientific backing to that whatsoever. I don't know where people got that from, right? Look for, it doesn't have to be similar. People conflate similar interests to similar, like, morality. No, those are two different things. Like, you guys can like different things, but as long as you're aligned on similar moral compass, similar objectives in life, similar temperament, honestly. Uh,
Yeah,
that's when you're going to be able to navigate through everything else, right? And
yeah,
so that is where I have people try and focus. Actually, my thesis in grad school is actually on mate selection within a like a Muslim American population. So it was a cross generational comparison. This was written before all these apps came out. I'm sure it would be very different now, but alhamdulillah. But the principle still stands. Like, I actually tell people, like, on that, because a lot of people complain about, oh man, it's so difficult now. It's a fitna, these apps, this and that. No, if you have your principles right and you know what you're looking for, and I don't know how you guys feel about this, but my stance is, look, Allah chooses your family for you, right? Of course, Allah chooses your spouse for you, but it's an effort that you have to make. You didn't have a choice into who your parents are, your siblings are, and so on, right? So why not be picky? You know, have a set criteria, be firm on that, have a blueprint before you start looking, so that you don't get swayed one way or another and forget your principles, and then cast a wide net. So I have seen people, albeit it's few and far between, who have gone on the apps but have a clear head, and they're able to navigate through without falling into that fitna, right? Because they answered some of these crucial questions before, like, what is it that I really want based on my situation? Who's most compatible with me? How's my temperament? How's theirs? I know exactly what I'm looking for, and then the entire interaction after that is purposeful. It's with an objective. It doesn't have to
yeah,
be robotic. You can still be organic, but I still have that vision of, this is my criteria list. This is what's in my head, right? These are my deal breakers. These are the things that I'm willing to compromise on a little bit. These are the things that are kind of additions to, like, bonus traits, I guess, right? Um, but they have that blueprint in their mind at all times.
Yeah, the apps thing is kind of I don't know. I think it's a tool. I think we need to use it, and I'm sure there's many successful marriages. But that whole thing about, like, finding somebody in the community, somebody that you've seen grown up perhaps, or somebody that your parents know, and they can talk about how they grew up or how their family came up, what type of means they had, what type of household situation they had. Like, there's such a big element that's missing in terms of being to identify somebody who aligns with your values, finding them in the community versus in the apps. And so, in terms of seeking a wife, I'm of the mindset that seeking a wife within the community, I know it's very difficult, but that could be or should be, maybe a first step, or at least something that we shouldn't discount and overly rely on apps.
Hmm.
You know,
Can't you do
I
both
read.
simultaneously?
Say again.
Can't you do both simultaneously? Because I feel it's a double-edged sword, right? So the part of my thesis was actually specifically this: our parents' generation uh, relied on what we call propinquity, or like just proximity of, this is like the neighbor's friend or whatever, and
yeah,
parents introduced and so on, right? And yes, that's easier, but does that mean that you're giving up somebody else who you might be more compatible with, right? So it's a double-edged
Hmm.
sword
So,
in that. Yeah.
you've heard of the 37% rule?
No, go ahead, explain.
So the 30%, the 7% rule, there's a very good article on it on bigthink.com. And it's based on the idea, this mathematical principle of called optimal stopping.
Mm.
So let's say I'm looking for an apartment. If I'm looking for an apartment, then, the first couple of apartments that I go and I look at, then I do so kind of, non-committal, right? So, I'll leave my checkbook at home. I'm just kind of looking at the options, right? So let's say, for example, I've given myself a month to look for an apartment. So for the first 11 days, I just go out and look at the options. And then after I've exhausted 37% of my choices, now I have a grasp of kind of what's there. So if I can't find anything better than the 37% that I've seen, that's the one. And if I do find something better, then that's the one. Because the probability tells me that I'm not going to find anything much better. And this is used for like hiring in HR, right? But it's also applied to dating and relationships and things like that. So it's a metric. It's not like a hard fast rule. But I find it to be very interesting, because I think what happens, even though apparently few studies out there that say that app use is down, like way down. People are realizing that apps are zift. They're not fulfilling the idea of actually creating relationships. They're creating opportunism, and kind of descending into just sexualization and objectification.
100%.
But I think one of the problems with the constant swiping or the constant engagement with others for this thing is that what you said, Osman, is that I think the 37% rule works if you actually know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
But if you as a man don't know what your own values are, then you will not be able to value a woman. And there's a kind of a rule of thumb that I've heard a business leader use, and I really like it, for determining what your values are. Because generally you talk to people like, oh, hey, well, what are your values? Oh, I value Islam.
Right. What define that, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, thanks. We all value Islam. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here.
Right.
But what is important to you? What is meaningful to you? What do you, not just likes and dislikes, right? So what he says is, think of something insulting. Think of someone insulting you, and what do you answer in the opposite? So if somebody said, Naveed, you're stupid, what's your visceral reaction? No, I might be a lot of things, but I'm not stupid. Okay, I'm a lawyer, right? I'm a social media influencer. I'm a male model. I'm not stupid. Okay, but so the opposite of somebody insulting you, you're stupid. No, actually, I'm very intelligent. That shows that you value the idea of intelligence. So you're probably going to be looking for a woman with intelligence. Somebody says, you're just a country bumpkin. You don't know anything. You're uneducated. No, actually, I've dedicated a lot of my time in my life to education. I value education. Well, do I only value book knowledge? No, I'm a person who reads and I listen to podcasts. So it's greater than just education. There's an idea of self-fulfillment, self-enrichment, right? Are you guys familiar with the VIA strengths test?
VIA strengths test? No.
So it was done by the University of Pennsylvania. You can go and take the test for free through the University of Pennsylvania, but the results will come to you like 2-3 days later. Or you can the guy who created the test actually created a nonprofit around it, and you can pay like $50 for a fancy report. It'll tell you, like, out of all of these characteristics, not that you have good or bad, but where are you stronger versus where are you weaker? I actually used this in my own personal development to find out what I'm strong in, what I'm weak in, and then how I can use the strengths to bolster the weaknesses. But it's very good even for for relationship stuff, of just understanding yourself better, right? So when we go back to when we go back to like, what to look in, what to look for in a woman, I think a big question is, what do we look for in ourselves first? And the opposites attract thing, unfortunately, is like a trope
Mm,
that lots of people talk about. I would love to hear what you think. I think a lot of it has to do with their kind of, not to get into like the overuse of trauma in conversations these
mm,
days, but I do think that some people are kind of trauma bonded to certain expectations
mhm,
from maybe their youth or their family. And so they think that, well, if I can just find somebody subconsciously, if I find somebody like that and I fix them, I fixed myself.
right.
Um, but if you know yourself, then I think it's easier to say, like if I say, oh, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Tazawwaj al-walud al-wadud," marry the woman who is fertile and loving. Well, it's not going to matter if she's fertile if I'm a lazy bum and I don't work out and I can't, I have low testosterone because I'm
Mm,
I'm sitting indoors all day and not getting sunlight and not, being active. So I have to be active in order for, to be able to, to get somebody like that. I have to be loving if I'm going to expect somebody to be loving as well. I need to be compassionate and empathetic if I want somebody who's compassionate and empathetic. So I think a lot of it goes with, what do we realize about ourselves? And then when we're in that relationship, how does the masculine realize his compassion in a marriage?
mm,
And how does the feminine? Because they will obviously manifest themselves in different ways. We're not saying that men and women are the same or that they should be the same, but you should have like core values that are agreed upon, because a man might show his compassion by caring for the family and supporting them, right, financially and protecting them. A woman might show her compassion by caring for the family and the household, right, and nurturing them. So
mm,
it'll manifest in different ways, but the value is agreed upon.
right, right. So to your first, I'm sorry, Navi, did you want to add something?
No, no, go.
Yeah, so to your first point, like, yeah, trauma bonding. Maybe trauma bonding is not the most. Uh, so we all come with baggage, right? And so yes, that comes into play in the search process as well. Look, what I've seen is this. I've seen, this is why it's important to like have that blueprint in your mind. I've seen people waste a lot of time with the wrong person and try and convince themselves, like in this rishta process, that like, okay, it's okay. I'm noticing more red flags than like a Chinese parade or something, right? But I just made that up. I don't know if that makes sense, but right, like,
That's a good one.
yeah, thank you.
It's so odd because the red in Chinese culture is for like baraka
Oh, for real?
and
Okay.
like good omens,
Oh,
you
okay,
know.
okay. Yeah,
So it works when you say it, but then when you know what the Chinese culture is behind it, you're like, you know,
fair enough. Yeah. Anyway, that's where I've seen the frustration like young men have, where you ask them like, okay, like, you're traumatized by this whole process. It's like, yeah, because you were trying to fix one girl for like 6 7 8 months, where you knew things
yeah,
were not, you try and force it to work, right? We lack decisiveness. We
yeah,
lack the ability to say that, what, like, even if I hurt her by ending things, I'd rather hurt her right now by ending things than like marry her, realize, oh my God, like I ignored all of these things, and lo and behold, I have all these marriage problems now. Be
yeah,
decisive. It's okay.
I actually think the modern Rishta process doesn't allow you to actually discover their values, right?
Mm,
That's kind
mm,
of why I push back on this app thing,
mm,
because if you're like, for me, for example, I'll just talk about myself and whoever wants to participate. Like when I am looking for a wife, or when I look for my wife, I mean, 21, 22, but for me, I was looking at it from the perspective of, I want somebody who's family oriented and someone who could make my house a home, right? And subhanallah, like we went to Dallas the other day, and we were staying in a hotel, but like somehow my wife was able to make the hotel feel like home. You know what I mean? Like that, it was kind of what I was looking for, but there was no way that I would be able to identify if I quote unquote dated her,
mm,
right? That came because of her family and like how she operated within her family, that type of thing. So I think like what we're concentrating on in the Rishta process only shows you how much money you make, how good looking you are, all the superficial things that don't really matter in the underlying marriage.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's interesting research that like even some of the most like liberal secular people struggle with. Cohabitating before marriage actually increases the chance of divorce.
SubhanAllah.
Kind of weird, right? Because you'd imagine, wait a minute, I already know like all their flaws, this, that. I've lived with the person, but for some reason or another, it increases the chance of divorce. Like from an Islamic paradigm, we can say obviously because you're taking the barakah completely away, but yeah, like even in grad school, even some of my most like liberal left-leaning professors, were like, yeah, but we can't discount the research. This is what it says. It just high rates of divorce if you cohabitate before marriage. I do think that even within like the way that the Rishta process works right now, there are certain questions that you can ask to at least try and parse out, like the person's personality, certain things that you can observe, so on, right? This is a psychological trick. I don't know, for lack of a better word. So there's you guys have heard of attachment theory, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, secure attached and insecure and anxious attached and so on. So the clinical way of actually assessing one's attachment is through something known as the AAI, or the Adult Attachment Interview. It's a whole series of questions, right? Now, if I want to figure out, if somebody's close to, if I'm family oriented, I am very family oriented, so I want somebody who knows how to have a healthy relationship with her family as well, right? So if you're talking to a girl who has no issues going off on her parents, right? And like for whatever, even if it's justified, but like dropping the F-bomb, and she's not going to respect you. If she can't overcome it from her parents, it's not right. So, well, what happens in a situation if I ask somebody and they're like, no, actually, I have amazing adab and I love my family, right? How do I sparse that out? I'm not going to go and like sit and observe their family. You know what I'm saying? So, the AAI, one of the questions is you ask the person, like, okay, cool, like it seems like you have a good relationship with your mom or your dad, right? Give me an adjective that you would describe that describes the relationship, not them, but the relationship, right? So warm, loving, whatever it might be, right? And so they give that adjective, and then you ask them, oh, okay, cool, like, can you give me an example maybe of where like you guys are warm or loving or whatever it might be. Now, it's difficult to come up with a live example, like an example in real time that matches that adjective. And for some people, I actually had it's interesting. Like there was one of my clients a long time ago. She went through a lot of trauma, and her response to this was, "I have a very loving relationship with my mom." And I said, "Oh wow, can you give me an example?" And she said, "Yeah, when I was 10 years old, she made me cook rice, and then she beat me because I burnt it." Like she looked me straight in the face without blinking and said that, because there's a complete disconnect, right? So it's not foolproof, but it's difficult for somebody to like make up on the spot a specific example that matches that adjective. So there are some ways that you can sparse through. Like it's not perfect, right? But in the rest of the process, this is one way that I've seen success in.
Like, what do you do with your premarital counseling to kind of figure out if these people align?
So in premarital counseling, that's great. Premarital counseling, I actually use it's a form of therapy known as PETC, or Pragmatic Experiential Therapy for Couples. Dr. Brent Atkinson, you should look it up. He's actually out in where is he in Elgin or something right now. Anyway, amazing, like world-renowned couples therapist right now. And so he talks about this idea of core differences. He talks about this idea that behind most arguments, there is a misalignment in the way that our nervous systems are wired. So for some of us are extroverted, some of us are introverted. You bring two people together who are different in that regards, those differences exacerbate themselves, right? Some people are problem solving first, some people are understanding first, right? This is how we deal with challenging situations, hurt feelings, so on, right? And some people are live for the moment, some people are invest in the future, right? And so there's 5 different core differences that research has found are at the core of a lot of these smaller fights. I don't want to say like the major like obvious ones like infidelity and drug use and all of that, but the other small like bickering that most of us go through, right? And so in my premarital counseling, I have people go through that and understand how they're wired. And then that's how I kind of measure compatibility. Outside of like the, if I'm working with a Muslim couple, I, really having them hammer and define like, okay, what does it mean to be religious? Like you're right, like it is a, to use the youngsters' language, it's a pretty basic answer, right? Like, just that I want somebody who's religious. Okay, what does that mean to you, dude?
Yeah.
Right? Right? It's like religious for one person is going to Jumu'ah and then like, wearing a convertible hijab, right? That's your assumption is that like they should know what you mean by religious, right? And your assumption is also that they were always religious, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
It's interesting that the idea of kind of like the process versus, if you don't go through some kind of premarital counseling, like how are you supposed to suss out, what this person's about? And I think that a lot of it is indicated. We touched on earlier the idea of attraction, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that will definitely be a motivation both for men and women, right?
And that's pretty binary, right? For the most part, right? So
I'm sorry.
That's pretty binary. Like either you are or you aren't. Like I don't think it's difficult for people to.
Yeah. But I just find way too many people who are just like, oh, it doesn't matter at all, and you'll have people that'll say like, yeah, I'm just not, like, my family pushed me into marrying this person and I'm just not into them.
And I've seen girls like self-esteem get shattered like that. It's a horrible thing to do to somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people need to understand a little bit of tact too, right? I mean, that's the reason why it comes up first, right? So it's, well, if I see her from afar and I'm not attractive, I shouldn't be pursuing this because I should be protective excuse me, of her emotional sanctity, right? فَانكِحُوا مَا طَابَ لَكُم مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ, and as we mentioned in the verse, and then the ahadith about الزوجة الصالحة, the righteous or the good wife. يعني إذا نظرت إليها تسرك, if you look to her, she pleases you. So it's more than just the physical attraction, but it's also the emotional attraction, the intellectual attraction, right? And so it's, I think a lot of guys are let down because they're on social media way too much. They're looking at women, they're exposing themselves way too much. And then they're thinking that that's all that women are and all that women do. And then they lose respect for women in general, not knowing that the self-respect in women will not be on social media doing that, right? I mean, I have my own theories about people that take way too many selfies, both men and women. But I think in general it's not healthy, and it's indicative of a deeper problem.
100%.
But then you have, the Prophet ﷺ saying, تنكح المرأة لأربع لمالها وجمالها وحسبها ودينها فاظفر بذات الدين تربت يداك. A woman is married for 4 reasons: for her wealth, for her beauty, for her status, or for her deen. Take to the one with deen, you'll be prosperous. That's the non-literal translation, right? Now, the what people misunderstand about this hadith is that the 3 other than deen are somehow disregarded. It doesn't matter what family they come from or what status they have, right? It doesn't matter what their socioeconomic status was. It just is important if they have deen. But then if you have extremely shallow understanding of deen, and you're not using other social clues from these other things, right? Like family status and wealth and beauty, because a lot of beauty actually has to do a lot with hygiene, and a lot of hygiene has to do with personal care, personal rituals, and that gives you an indication of the house. The status has a lot to do with the family overall and how they deal with each other and their etiquette and their character. Their wealth has a lot to do with their relative place in society and how that wealth was built. Was it built in an ethically, viable and halal way or not? So I think there's a lot that kind of can be sussed out from those 3 other things. And what I find in religious circles is an almost denial of these other things, and saying, no, it's all about the deen. But then you're like, oh, well, tell me about her deen. She's always at the Quran halaqa. Okay, but she's a horrible person, right? She backbites and she does this and she does that. And no amount of prayer is going to make up for that. I mean, if a woman was punished in her grave for backbiting and carrying tales, then what good is it going to do? And this is a woman that lived at the time of the Prophet. What is it going to good is it going to do someone else? So I think in developing, you have to men have to develop, and I think, Usman, when you talked about being able to walk away, you used a certain word. What was it?
Decisive.
Yeah, you have to be decisive, right? So you have to know more about yourself, but you also have to know what you're looking for. And if it's not there, don't waste your time and don't waste anyone else's. Because women will waste your time in talking sometimes. It will be this thing I know that I will never be able to marry you, but I'm bored, so I'm going to continue to talking to you just because you're into me and you give me the attention that I want.
Right, you're fulfilling a certain need at that moment.
Yeah, and that's extremely dangerous for men to get trapped into, where you start, for lack of better term, simping for a woman that is in reality not trying to look at you as a husband. She's only looking at you as a temporary frivolity, right? A temporary preoccupation, right? That can be very, very dangerous, right? So these, the thing about, we look to attraction, we ask about the family, we ask about habits, we ask about, where they're from, relative wealth and things like that, because that's going to tell us a lot about how they are, given to this thing that we started with, how well socialized they are.
Yeah.
And I've made this point before. I was really surprised at the reaction that I got from it. And this is because I think I may have noticed this just because I was not socialized in this way, right? My observation of a lot of people in the Muslim community is that they are only socialized for professional settings.
100%.
100%. They are not socialized for anything out of their very, very restrictive personal social settings. So they go to their family's dinner parties, they're with their family, and the only time they deal with others is when they're in school, when they're in work, right? Or they're in some kind of activity where they're playing up a position for maybe even for their family. And so you never really get to see that person casually. And if they really, are the kind of person that you would want to be with, and you're like, why did I marry Bridezilla? And then it becomes, well, that's because you actually never saw them with their mask off. There was always this mask that was on because everything was so, well, what type of education do you have? What type of house does your family live in?
Right.
And not how does your family live in the house?
Exactly. No, very, very well said. It looks good on paper.
I tell guys a lot, a huge indication of the kind of woman that you would want to marry is her relationship with her father.
Yeah.
And if you find that it's a bad relationship, it's probably going to be a bad relationship with you.
Right.
And if it's a terse or a tense relationship because of her relationship with her mother, she's going to model the same type of behavior in dealing with you.
Right.
So the asking about relationship with parents, I really like what you mentioned earlier. The adjectives thing, I think is extremely important for learning how to actualize these broad characteristics that were put in the hadith.
Totally, yeah, and that's I'm sure that's not to say for people listening out there that you're responsible for not everybody's going to have the perfect relationship with their parents, right? We can't control what our parents do. However, it's very telling. Let's suppose that you have, if a girl says, "Oh, my parents," hopefully she doesn't say that in the rishta process, but feels that my parents
marriage
have
process, for those who don't know,
narcissistic tendencies or whatever it might be, or maybe the father is really unfair, right?
Yeah.
then gauge how patient she is through that, right?
Right.
How she sets healthy boundaries without losing her adab,
Yeah.
because that's a huge green flag, right? Because that means that when you guys are in disagreement, there's a certain line that she would never cross as far as adab, and she would be able to speak her mind, but she'd be able to do it in a manner that is pleasing to Allah,
Yeah.
because she's done that in maybe multiple times with her family, where she knows how to healthily go through disagreements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's very, very important, right? Of what you mentioned about how she would, yeah, you can't choose your family, right? But you can choose how you react to them.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Exactly.
so if the initial reaction is, well, I have to listen to them, not you, or I have to give priority to them, not you, you're probably going to end up never being a priority in a relationship, and you'll feel resentful and used.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I've also seen this is both for guys and girls, right? Like self-esteem plays a huge part in this. We're talking about have principles and like if you have a very distorted view of yourself, right? You don't think highly of yourself. You don't see the good qualities about yourself. Then you're going to lower your standards to a point that's really detrimental. I've seen it over and over again, where it's like, oh well, I'm awkward, or I don't have much to offer, and so therefore I'm going to settle. And you know,
But do you think the problem that we're seeing in the kind of the marriage market right now is that guys are being too picky, not being picky enough, not looking at the right things, you know, discounting quote unquote career women? Like, I guess, how can we shift kind of the mentality of a guy in the market right now?
I'm going to stick with my first statement. I think that like at least in my practice, what I've seen, the biggest thing again is wasting your time with the wrong person.
Mm.
That's what I've seen the most of,
Mm.
right? Like however that looks, whether that's being dragged along by the girl, right? Or you take whatever it is, like it's you see red flags, you still choose to continue. That's where I see a lot of the problem, right?
Yeah, learning to read the room.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest problems as well is not only is there a lack of decisiveness with engaging, is that there's also an idea of commitment where there really is none.
Hmm.
Meaning that I'm committed to the idea of this person, or she's even committed to the idea of you, but there's actually nothing formal.
Hmm.
And so people end up with, and men specifically end up with a lot of letdowns because they think that they had been forward enough or they had been explicit enough, and in reality they never said anything. They were creating a narrative in their mind, and they were too afraid to say anything. And
Right.
so you have to be decisive about not only of if I've engaged with somebody, to talk, that I can say, hey, this is not what I'm looking for. I wish you the best. We will go our separate ways. But also of being decisive enough to say, I'm willing to get let down by them rejecting me by saying, hey, I am interested in you. I would, want to explore if that's something that you're interested in me as well. And
Yeah.
then we can, if you are, then you can tell me how we take those next steps. I'll tell you how I would take those next steps.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think a lot of guys as well are not explicitly saying that, right? Um, because of fear of rejection.
Exactly. I read a quote once that in this whole process, like we're in competition to see who we can care the least. Who's gonna fold first? You know what I'm saying? Like, so yeah, I'm not really into like I have the upper hand if I'm not really into her. It's
Right.
childish. That works in eighth grade maybe. I don't know. It's like yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of a story recently where I guess some guy and girl were going through a rishta process, and the guy showed up to somewhere and like gave her flowers or made
Mm,
some like, gesture, and you know, she was turned off by that, by the the expression, and she felt that it should have been more hard to get, and because it wasn't hard to get, that discounted her looking into this guy. right? So I guess they had already met. The parents were already on board. And as a thing to kind of say, okay, moving forward, he made this gesture, but she actually was turned off by that. I thought that was really interesting. Yeah, to your point of who can care less, and it's almost like she wanted to be shown that he didn't
Right.
care. Yeah.
Well, I think one thing that men need to realize as well is that you'll have plenty time to romance her after there's commitment. But in a day and age where women can get so much attention from so many different outlets, their friends gassing them up online, likes, multiple men pursuing them, that you know the only way that you're going to not be lost in a crowd is by actually being serious and setting standards for yourself first.
Yeah, absolutely. Be clear on your intention. Inshallah, you'll find somebody who's clear on theirs and honest about the process, right? Absolutely.
I mean, I'll share something personal. I was once challenged. They said, hey, if you see someone that you're interested in, even if they have a trait that you don't like, you need to kind of like get over that and just put it out there. Just see if you can get yourself kind of like that thing of like, oh, if you go to a restaurant, just like, to get over your fear of engagement, ask for a 10% discount and see what they give you. Right. And I got one of the best lessons in dealing with others from doing that. So I approached the woman that I was interested in, and I said, I've noticed you. I think, yada yada yada, and I wanted to, see what if you thought similar. And she said, "Thank you very much, but I'm looking for something different." And that's it.
That's it.
It was so concise, decisive, respectful, and thank God, because I really wasn't trying to go for it. It was really like put up to, you need to like break this like barrier that you have about yourself. So I was like, okay, cool. Like I realized, yeah, that's not what I want either. But at the same time, you have to develop a level of tact in dealing with these things as well, right?
Absolutely. What do you guys feel about this whole idea of chemistry? Right? Because you're like, I don't know if you've heard it. It's like, there has to be chemistry before I have to feel it.
I mean, I'm gonna be honest. I look for the vibes, man. I do look for the vibes. I mean, if I can't vibe with a person, meaning that there's a level of compatibility that, like, it's not the soulmate thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's ridiculous. Because
you don't believe in love at first sight? That's also not a thing scientifically, anyway. But anyway,
yeah. I mean,
at first sight, yeah.
If you ask a testosterone charged man, right, then it's it's like any woman that smiles at him is going to be.
Exactly.
But when you do realize that, yeah, this is how my body functions, then you realize that, yeah, that's not a thing. But I do think that, like, passing the vibe check is an important thing, meaning that if I make a joke, right, if I make a quip and I consider it to be offhanded, innocent, not a big deal, and they either get offended or they can't understand it, to me that's a big issue of compatibility.
Yeah.
Right? So it's less about like, oh yeah, we were like, we felt the vibes, the emotional charge. We didn't say a single word, not like that. But like when you're speaking with them, you do get a sense of, what are those, are they the mirror neurons, right?
Yes.
So you do get a sense of somebody who is connected with you. And there's some basis, in that Islamically, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-arwahu kal-junud al-mujannada, فما ta'arafat ta'arafat, وما تناكرت اختلفت." That the souls are like battalion soldiers. So those that knew each other, meaning in the primordial state when our souls were first created, then they find solace with each other. And those that did not know each other, they find difference with each other. So you ever meet somebody and you're just like, man, I just do not like this person.
Yeah.
Like even just amongst men, like,
Right.
okay, he can be my brother, but he will not be my friend.
Yeah.
Right. And I think as well for men, you've got to learn how to control the sexual attraction level, right? And realize that that's not. I tell people, if your relationship is 90% sex and 10% everything else, it's a bad relationship.
Right. Right.
If it's 10% sex and 90% everything else, then when the sex goes, you're still going to have a lot to, in your old age, you're still going to be around. I think a lot of the divorce and the relationship problems is, and I use sex as kind of an avatar for the materialistic considerations, right? That you're when you're too focused on those issues of self-fulfillment from the other person and not sharing of values, it becomes hard to really gauge if you are vibing with them or not.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think how you're defining vibing, to me, it sounds more like you're looking for intellectual compatibility, or like almost like an intellectual intimacy there.
For me, absolutely.
Yeah.
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 But
I'm
there's also
glad
the
I got a
other.
free session out of this.
Yeah. It's one of my like unspoken criteria was that they have to get like 90s references and stuff, and so yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense.
What about like guys looking? Do you think that we kind of hear about this term career woman very often, and is that an automatic no for guys? Like how do we in this day when everyone's really working, how do we take that on the plate, and how do we kind of weigh whether they're career oriented or highly educated, or looking at kind of the stats where women are much higher, getting more educated than men? How do we balance that, or how should we approach that?
Right. So, is there an assumption of like a career woman is going to have XYZ qualities, or are we able to parse that out?
Yeah, I guess the assumption, from the frame that I'm asking, is that career woman means she's not going to care about me and she's not going to care about the kids.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a generalization in the sense of like somebody who has rahma will know how to balance that, right? And I've seen, and again, I think in this day and age, right, it's very common for women to be educated, to work, so on, and that I believe to a certain extent that should be encouraged, not just for monetary purposes, but they're also going to be teaching your children, right? So I do think that's important. But I have seen even with non-Muslims, right, like where they will have this, and this is not always the case, right? But I spoke to somebody who was making a seven-figure salary in the yes, and she was like, I'm not going to, like, she got pregnant and she's like, yeah, I'm not going to give my career this, that for, like, why can't he give up his career? I make more than him, blah, blah, all of that, right? Baby came and she fell head over heels for him. And she actually ended up like quitting her job, right? Not by force, but just because like that rahma kicked in, and she's like, forget this, like, you go work, like I'm going to love on this kid, So, yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I had dinner.
Not always the case though, but yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, I had dinner with a friend and his wife and mother-in-law, and it was like a family thing. It's family that I'm very close to, right? So this is my friend, his brother-in-law, his wife, his mother-in-law. Everybody was there, and she said something very interesting, kind of unprompted. And she said, I feel that a lot of young women are being pushed and kind of conditionalized to fulfill professional goals, and they're not being told of the utter joy that there is in being a mother.
Right.
Now, I want to qualify this. She is like, her husband is the cook. Like, he's a much better cook than her.
Yeah.
Right. So they have an understanding in their house that they're both good at certain things, and they do those things. So he's an amazing cook, actually. and she's not so much. But she is very good at kind of like organizing things for the kids and making sure that they're cared for and they have activities and all of that. And I think where a lot of the issues, the tropes kind of come up is it's almost like trying to fulfill this 1950s American nuclear family idea of what family should have been,
Mm.
and not realizing that the values are more important. Like a woman doesn't necessarily have to cook and clean at home to be a good mother.
Right.
But Islamically, she does need to care for her husband's household. Now, how she gets that done is a different story. She does it herself. She has others come in. You know, she manages the children in doing so, whatever, right? You know, Ali radiallahu anh and Fatima radiallahu anha. Fatima took care of the home. Ali was a day laborer outside. Ibn Mas'ud was, you know, a student learning from the Prophet ﷺ. His wife Zainab was a businesswoman.
Mm.
She actually had more money than him.
Mm.
He would make enough to care for the children, but when there were shortfalls, she was actually encouraged by the Prophet to pitch in. So I think that there are different models, but the you know, the reason for me bringing up this story was this woman who she is very accomplished, right? She was just saying that my priorities were just about professional, you know, certifications and what's the word I'm looking for? Not certifications, you know, degrees, you know, degrees and accolades and all of this. And she said that was impressed on me a lot by other women in the community. And it's almost as if that was being impressed on me, but they were also still kind of hiding the amazing feeling that they would get from being a mother, because they were playing up to societal expectations of what it meant to be successful.
Right.
And she said her husband actually broke her out of that by just being like, he's just like so he's just like a easygoing guy. It's like, what do you want in life? I just want to be happy. You know, I want to be happy. I want to, you know, play sports sometimes, spend time with my wife and kid. Yeah. And so I think that what happens is that it's going back to Naveed, what you had mentioned about, like, you know, the professional woman. I wonder, Usman, how can that be seen? Because I've seen it go both ways. I've seen men, it's like, oh, she has such great potential to be a mother, but she really doesn't want to be.
Right. And
then in other instances, she's talking up an ideal that she doesn't really believe in because that's what society is expecting.
Right.
You know, I had a family member tell me that, yeah, I think a lot of the feminism discourse amongst young Muslim women is like a shield, right? So they can get creeps away from themselves by saying the feminist stuff. And then they let that down when they see somebody who, you know, they know can actually step in and take care of them. Because let's be honest. I mean, some guys talk a big game about, you know, ar-rijalu qawwamun 'ala an-nisa, and, you know, and they can't take care of a Lego house, much less a real
absolutely. Yeah. They don't have that the sense of altruism, I think, that most men should have, when you not to the point that you're neglecting yourself, but I mean, you guys all have kids, right? I mean, you sacrifice for your kids, and we do it over and over again just because, you know, to see a smile on their face, right? And so, I mean, subhanAllah, there's a lot to be said about that, right? Like with parenthood, you're right, it's not spoken about enough, right? We don't speak about the joy of being there when your kid says his or her first word, right? I mean, weigh that compared to whatever promotion you can get at work, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, so, I mean, I do think that we need to really, really start promoting this idea that there's immense honor in raising righteous children, immense honor in that, right? And you don't have it if you choose not to go through higher education. I have family members who, completed medical school, completed residency, and are chose just to raise families. They're extremely educated, but they don't want to work, right? You're going to tell them, oh, you're wasting this. You're wasting. No, that's their choice, right? Like, let them do it. Stop picking on them. Let them raise their kids, right? So, I've heard your question. I was thinking about my kids.
No, so as we kind of wrap up, there was actually a comment on this, and I was thinking about this before. So there's this thing that on the apps, at least 1% of guys get 99% of the girls. But when you look at like Muslim conferences or Muslim events, it seems like there's 3 times as many women than men at these events, for example, or like singles events and things like that. So like, do you think the 1% of guys are getting 99%, or why are there so many women at these matrimonial events and there's not enough guys? Like, what do you think that phenomena is coming from, and how can a guy kind of get through that?
I'm gonna say I could say something very incendiary and rude, but then Allah guided me in the moment to just quote an ayah.
Allah Akbar.
الطيبات للطيبين والطيبون للطيبات, right? والخبيثات للخبيثين والخبيثون للخبيثات. Wholesome men are for wholesome women, and wholesome women are for wholesome men. And filthy men are for filthy women, and filthy women are for filthy women. This statistic of 1% of the guys is getting 99% of the girls. Sure, if you're clubbing, if you're watching trash like Fresh and Fit, where they're literally paying women who already take money to show their bodies online and having them sit for a podcast and then berating them for more money, right? If you're in social media and real life social situations where everything is predicated on exploitation, then yes, the more exploitative a person is, the more exploited people they're going to have under their belt. But that's not happening in actual wholesome social settings. You are not, you are not looking at every woman in your life as as prey. Right? You're realistic about who you should be thinking of and who you should not be thinking of. There's a reason why the Prophet ﷺ, mentioned from the kaba'ir, and yazni al-mar'u bi halilati jarihi, that for a man to go and commit zina with the wife of his neighbor, literally the halal woman of his neighbor, right? Because when your eye is looking at other than what it's allowed, you'll always be enticed. There's a quote, actually, when I was looking up things today. I want to read it. It says, the wise person, this is Ar-Ruhaybani in his book Al-Matalib Al-Aliyah. He says, the wise person should beware of letting their gaze wander freely, for the eye sees what is unattainable in a way that does not reflect its true nature. This might lead to infatuation, which can destroy both the body and the deen. Any man afflicted with such a thing should contemplate the flaws of women, meaning that if a person finds himself way too sexually attached and enticed, then he should start thinking that the fact that women get infections and that they menstruate and other things like that. Just stating it plainly, because some might think that we're talking about saying that women are flawed. No, what we're saying is that when men are too attached to these superficial, false ideas of value that only value women for their sexual input or output, right? Then yeah, the guy who is most exploitative is going to exploit more women. I don't believe that to be the case. I would love to hear stats on it, actual stats, but I'm very hesitant to believe anything that generally comes like tropes from the manosphere, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think, like you said, there's 2 different worlds that we're operating from, and so yeah, if you're talking about swiping right and swiping left, sure, maybe many women swipe right on the same guy, but in the real world, like you said, I don't see that happening in like you said, in wholesome settings, in the Muslim settings and things like that, I don't think that this 1% of guys getting all the girls.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I would agree.
And I think men as well discount themselves a lot, right?
Mm.
Is they and again, like maybe if this wasn't public, it would be a bit more raw, right? But there's something wrong with you as a man if you're always looking at other men online and wanting to be them. There's something wrong with you.
Right. Right.
If you look to other men with an idea that they're objects of lust by all these women, you might have a little bit of that in you too.
Yeah.
And you need to lower your gaze and concentrate on those things that are wholesome instead. Because when you actually talk to real people, you will find that their ideas of what is beautiful and what is enticing and even what is sexually attractive is much different than what you think. I've met a lot more women who will say, no, I think men in tight pants with chiseled bodies look gay.
Mm.
I don't want that. I'd rather have the dad bod, that I can cuddle with. And there's other women who say, no, I want that guy who's built like that. And others say, no, I want a fat guy, right? And I've seen all of these things. The one thing is that a lot of people won't state these things because the social stigma that comes and the expectations that come from it, right? Like I've had men come to me and say, hey, I need your help. I'm trying to find a wife. Well, what's your problem? Like your age group where you live, there's all these women. I want a big girl. I'm not attracted to skinny mini, I'm not attracted to that. I want a girl that's got some size on her. And it's like, okay, I mean, I can understand that. Well, why don't you just say that? It's because there's a stigma. Right. So I think we have to invest less in social media and social media tropes. And it's been the last couple of years has been dominated by filth.
Yeah, it's all hogwash. Absolutely.
Yeah, dominated by fake statistics and argumentation, and actually invest in like real human interactions. And if you find yourself, you go to have real human interactions and you're awkward, then you have a lot more work to do on yourself than than worrying about what other people are doing, whether they're 1% and 99% and all of that.
Jazakallah. I'm not sure how much time you guys have left, but I do want to wrap things up. Any final thoughts on what men need to seek in a wife?
So I'd just like to read kind of traditional sources. They all mention like 8 different characteristics, and then on the opposite they mention 7 different characteristics. So there's like positive and negative. So the positives are like she has deen, you consider her beautiful, she has wealth, she has status, she is foreign to you, meaning she's not like from your relation, she's not like a cousin or family member. They prefer that so that there's not an effect on the children. She should be a virgin. She should be from a family that has good health and fertility, and that she should be a person of intellect and discernment. Right? I think that's one in and of itself, because there was a lot of stuff online about people talking about wanting women that weren't educated and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, bro, you might win the battle. You're gonna win the battle. You're gonna lose the war, because when she's when you have kids, if you have a woman that has no education whatsoever, what are you gonna do?
Right. Exactly.
Who's gonna teach your children? And then on the opposite side, it's a woman has attachment out, to say, too attached to her children. She reminds her husband of all she does for him. She complains frequently. She's materialistic. She She spends most of her time obsessed with herself, so there's narcissism. She is over talkative, or pretends to be ill when she's not. I'm just pulling this from the book. I'm not saying like they mention these types of things. And I think probably if we drill down onto that and some of the marginalia on those things, I think what we would find is that we're trying to these early scholars are essentially trying to like identify character issues that would be what we would call green flags and red flags, and not necessarily that this is the definitive list.
Right.
Osman, any parting words?
No, Barakallahu I think you summed it up really well.
No, those points are really awesome and really, like you said, definitely summarize what we should look for in a wife. Alhamdulillah. No, jazakumullahu khairan to both of you and to everybody listening. We hope you're enjoying this monthly series that we're trying to put together about different areas related to marriage, finding a spouse, living happily with a spouse. And if you have any suggestions on any topics, feel free to message us on our Instagram page, or you can email us, inshallah, and we'd be more than happy to. I'm sure in the next few months we'll have an open Q&A. But if there's any other topics, let us know. Keep us in your du'as. Check out the Nikah Masterclass. We do have seminars coming up. We do have a 8-hour class that we invite you to take if you are thinking about getting married, if you're engaged to be married. It talks about compatibility. It talks about the legal and Islamic aspects of marriage and divorce. So something that we believe that everybody should really learn and really look into. And of course, mashallah, we have our brother Usman Mughni. If you're looking for premarital counseling, I'm sure he can offer those types of services. And you can check him out at peacefullyu.org. Jazakallah.
Yeah.
Nice to see you.
All right. Barakallahu feek, everyone. Thank you, Naveed and Osman. Always a pleasure. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.